David, very good morning to you.
Morning, Mike. Good to see you.
Good to see you. According to Nigel Farage, society is facing societal collapse. Do you think he's right?
That's probably a little bit strong for my taste, if I'm honest, Mike. But what I think is really interesting about the announcements by Reform yesterday on crime and justice are that actually what they're responding to is what the public want is unequivocally a tougher approach to crime and policing. Yeah. And Policy Exchange did some work on this earlier this year. And it's not just sort of the groups that you might expect want a tougher approach to crime policing. It is every single demographic group, so every age group, every ethnic group, every economic group, and supporters of every political party. Even the Green Party and the Liberal Democrats want to see a tougher approach to crime and criminals. So what Reform are doing here, I would suggest, is responding to what the public are looking for in terms of crime and policing policies.
No question at all. I mean, we've been doing this for a very long time at this radio station, this TV station. You know, we've been hearing people complain about the police and the way that they respond to crime in the first place. They just kind of close off all sorts of investigations straight away. I mean, my favourite, I think, was one from a couple of years ago where somebody said that they got home from a foreign holiday, house had been burgled, broken into, loads of stuff stolen. They called the police at 8:30. At 10:30 they got a call back from the police to say they'd closed the case. Hadn't come round, hadn't come to see them. You know, that kind of thing happens all the time. So people really want to see the police being more engaged with victims. They certainly want to see them doing more investigation and actually solving more crimes.
Yeah, and do you know what? I've got every confidence that frontline police officers, the police officers actually on the front line, want to be doing exactly the same. And it's not just the police where we see problems in the criminal justice system. So, for example, I was looking at some data which Policy Exchange has had sent in the last couple of days. Last year, there were 837 offenders, 837 criminals who already had 75 previous convictions. And when they got convicted of another crime, they didn't go to prison.
Yeah.
So if we can't find space in our prisons for those 837 prolific criminals who have already racked up 75 previous convictions, and bear in mind, that's just the offences we've caught them for, then, you know, what on earth is going on in the prison system?
Yeah, exactly right. Well, because, you know, we know from what's happened under Labour in the last year or so that the prisons are woefully unprepared for the number of criminals that we want to put in them. And so their response basically was to let a load of criminals out of prison, which was a disaster, you know, because I think more than a third of them, if not a half of them, had to be recalled. Some of them who were sex offenders committed more sex offences, and some of the people that they released back into the community were in prison for domestic violence offences, and they weren't even able to tell their victims that they were coming back out.
And, you know, we should be fair to the Labour government, as I know you always are, Mike.
Of course.
The prison system is a situation which they inherited from the previous government.
Yep.
The previous government's hands are certainly not clean here.
Not at all. No, absolutely not.
My biggest concern when it comes to prisons and this government, particularly when we see the independent review by David Gork earlier this year, and if the government accepts most of the sort of recommendations in there, which it looks like they probably will, is actually that it's not just about managing the crisis in the prison system. It's just fundamentally about sending fewer criminals to prison. And if that's the case, if that's the ideological position that this government are taking, that is really problematic.
Well, I think so too, yeah, absolutely right. And they say they're building more prisons, but I don't know how long that's going to take. But the other problem I saw this week is that I think the number is something like 76,000 cases in a backlog of cases in the county court system, which means that some people who are, you know, sort of scheduled for a trial of one kind or another in the criminal courts are going to have to wait till about 2029.
Yeah, so the Crown Court backlog is just getting worse and worse as every year goes by, and it seems that the solutions to deal with it are either half-baked or just nowhere, not even near the oven, if I stretch the metaphor. But, you know, the problems are getting worse year on year, and the reality is for victims of crime, having to wait 4 years for a court case is just a ridiculous situation.
It's awful, isn't it?
The reality is victims and witnesses will pull out of giving evidence, and the reality is what suspects of crimes are doing now is hoping they'll get a long trial date, because that means the victims and witnesses will pull out and they'll get away with it.
Yeah. Incredible. What do you make of one of the other suggestions by Nigel Farage, which is bringing back a sort of 3 strikes and you're out policy? If you commit 3 crimes, regardless of what they are, you stay in prison for life.
Well, I certainly think that we need to take a much stronger approach to prolific offenders, and it's welcome. You know, Policy Exchange has talked about this and written about this repeatedly over recent years. Exactly where you draw the line in terms of the number of offences is the challenge, because you have to work out how you can make sure you have enough prison places for those people. Certainly, you know, the group I just talked about, those 837 offenders with 75 previous convictions, you know, they absolutely should be subject to a lengthy term of imprisonment, whatever their next offence is, and as far down that list as we can go. You know, whether it is you know, 20 offences, 10 offences, whatever we can accommodate. Ultimately, the most prolific offenders commit the most crime, and they should be in prison. Yeah,
and we have to then take into account as well the state of the parole system, don't we? Because more and more people are getting released early. That's another Labour policy, to get people out after serving something like 40% of their time. But the parole board and the parole system have already said we can't really monitor everybody. We haven't got the wherewithal to do it. So that's also a mess.
Yeah, and the automatic release system which exists in this country is just problematic in itself. Yeah. So, you know, you are automatically released for most offences at around, well, it depends exactly where, but the 40–50% point. The latest reviews are suggesting that will be further cut as well. So there's no requirement for good behaviour in prison, particularly. There's no sort of, you don't have to earn your release through rehabilitation programs or education, which might make you less likely to offend when you're out of prison. And so certainly the whole structure of this, where you're just automatically released, seems like a bit of a farce. And it just makes a mockery of the public looking at the system, because a judge will say, I'm sentencing you to 5 years in prison. Actually, if you only get 2 years, well, I mean, ultimately the public are being lied to about this.
Right. Well, quite, and we still have the case of Lucy Connelly, which I know is an isolated case, but it's, you know, she's a touch point for an awful lot of people. You know, still serving time in prison, 31 months for basically sending a tweet. You know, one of the sex offenders who was put in prison just this week for a migrant offence against a young woman in this country got less time.
And this is where the public look at this sort of comparison, understandably, and just cannot understand what on earth is going on in our criminal justice system. Whatever the rights and wrongs of individual cases, and certainly the sex offender that you're talking about, it is astounding to me that the sentence is that short. But whatever the rights and wrongs of individual cases, when you compare, as inevitably we all do, when you look at that comparison, it just seems like the system is very much awry.
Yeah, absolutely right. David Spencer, great to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. Head of Crime and Justice at Policy Exchange. Very sensible man.